Hello and welcome to Fast Forward Newsline. My name is David Kattenberg. Today on Fast Forward, precarious work in the new economy and how old-fashioned labor organizing is helping precarious workers face the challenge. My guest today is Sara Arenson, who's a Winnipeg-based freelance writer and playwright and a bit of a precarious worker herself, I think. Am I right?
Yeah, you'd be right, Dave. Lots of the work I've done and have continued to do is precarious.
And what do we mean by that, precarious work?
Well, as the name implies, it's work that doesn't have stability built into it. So traditionally, when you think about good jobs, you think about an employer-employee relationship that's enduring, that has benefits associated with it, such as sick time, such as medical benefits, unemployment, and so on, the rights that have been fought for and won by the labor movement. But precarious work turns this on its head. Precarious work is work that's temporary, that's based on a contract, often part-time, with no guaranteed hours or benefits.
And amongst the most vexing of these situations these days is this new type of corporation that's different from all the other corporations of the past, though no less powerful. A corporation like Uber, which somehow seems to be exempt from labor laws. Tell me about Uber workers and their attempts to organize themselves and some of the difficulties they face.
Sure. Well, when it comes to labor laws, the issue with Uber, companies like that, is that instead of regarding the people that work for the app as actual employees, they look at them, they call them independent contractors, which is kind of a strange term because they don't get to control the prices they charge. They don't get to control their working conditions. Yes, they get to choose what jobs they take, but the drivers for Uber, for example, have to pay for their cars, they have to pay for their gas. So if the price of gas goes up, it's on them, not the company. And if there's any accidents, they're liable. They have to deal with their insurance companies. Uber just collects the money, charges the customers, runs the technology platform. And as a result of calling its employees contractors, it gets to skirt labor laws. So the benefits that would normally go along with a work relationship don't accrue to people that work for app companies. And the thing is, a person can also work for more than one company at the same time. And so it's not really clear who's responsible for making sure workers have these additional benefits. So a person could be working 40 or more hours a week, and in fact, these companies will incentivize working long hours, but there might not be overtime, and there will not be benefits associated with it. So it's sort of like a legal loophole that they are able to go through.
And I was reading one article that said that really the disruptiveness, when we talk about disruptive technologies, the disruptiveness here is not the technology per se, it's this turning on its head of the relationship between the employer and the employee in such a way that the corporation exerts enormous amount of power and essentially prevents people from unionizing.
Well, yeah, when you look at the actual technology itself, traditional taxi companies also use apps and so on. You can hail a taxi that way, and potentially, if somebody wanted to, and people are working on open source solutions for this, you can actually create a system where independent drivers could independently engage with customers through technology to do these kinds of transactions. There doesn't actually have to be a company like Uber in the middle.
And there's just been a recent decision in Seattle City Council. Tell me about this.
Well, recently in Seattle, after quite a bit of a campaign, there was a law passed allowing drivers of Uber and other companies like that the ability to collectively bargain. And up until now, the company has been preventing people from, say, signing on to class action lawsuits, and they made them sign very fixed contracts. So this ability to bargain over wages and working conditions is the first step towards actually creating an equitable basically equitable working conditions for people in these app-driven industries.
What other examples can you give me about precarious employment in different sectors and how folks are trying to find new ways to collectively bargain and unionize, given the fact that they're working in such precarious ways?
Sure. Well, there's a few stories from around the world that I've been looking at lately. So, for example, there are situations where workers are working full-time and they're working on an ongoing basis, but they're not considered permanent employees. And for example, in India, cement workers, there's a lot of precarious cement workers, and there's efforts to unionize. But the difficulty with unionizing precarious workers is that oftentimes with employers, the conditions of their contracts don't allow them to be part of the union. So the idea is to make the tent wider for unions, to make it so that these precarious workers can come in to the tent. And other examples might be areas like university teaching, where you end up with a lot of adjunct professors, as they're called, or sessional professors, as they're called in Canada. And again, the same situation, people working for years for contracts that may or may not be renewed, but often are renewed on a continuous basis, are getting paid less, have fewer opportunities for professional development. And but unions have been making progress. In the United States, for example, they've been unionizing adjunct professors, they've been unionizing graduate students, teaching assistants, research assistants, as well. Areas that haven't been unionized up till now, like the digital media, for example, have recently been undergoing union drives. So places like Salon, Huffington Post, Gawker, Vice are all in the midst of union drives right now.
And here in Canada, Unifor, which happens to be a generous sponsor of the Green Planet Monitor in the Fast Forward series, full disclosure, Unifor has now created a new category of union collective, the community chapter, where anybody who can pull together a bunch of people and want to unionize can actually do that under Unifor.
Well, that sounds like a great idea. I'm actually very interested in the possibility for people that would not normally be considered workers in the traditional sense, like covered under traditional labor law, to have this opportunity, because nowadays there are so many different ways that people are bringing in money. And that's one actually characteristic of what's getting called the Precariat. It's like a new social class.
The Precariat.
Yeah, the Precariat, people who are basically in precarious work. And one of the characteristics is that they're getting their money from all sorts of different places. So the ability to organize, the ability to have a union represent them, to get a better deal with the organizations they're interacting with, has got to be a plus.
How must policy change, labor policy, the labor policy framework in countries like Canada? How must it evolve in public policy in order to take into account the way the economy, the labor market is evolving?
Well, people are talking about policy solutions that will allow precarious workers to have the same benefits that full-time workers, permanent workers have. And some of the policy solutions have been, for example, creating accounts, like basically benefit accounts that the various companies would pay into. And that way it would be sort of portable. And there's this notion of separating benefits, social benefits, from the labor relationship to begin with. In fact, some of these people are advocating, for example, Guy Standing, the fellow who came up with the idea of the Precariat, is advocating for a universal minimum income as a way of helping people achieve security, because one of the big problems being in the Precariat is the lack of security and the anxiety. And the other thing that policymakers can do is they can look at the actual categories of worker, because one of the reasons why companies are able to get around paying benefits and following labor laws in certain situations is because rather than having their employees classified as employees, they're called independent contractors, but they can reevaluate. The governments can look at this and say, are these employees really independent contractors? And if they're not really independent contractors because they don't control the conditions of work, they don't control the prices and so on, and they're not really employees because they don't get the benefits, they don't get the guarantees, then they're in some sort of in-between category. And what policymakers can do is take a look at coming up with a new category of worker.
Sara Arenson, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here, Dave.
You've been watching and listening to Fast Forward, stories of challenge and change, and the Fast Forward Newsline. We are generously supported and wish to thank the Government of Canada and the Social Justice Fund of Unifor for their generous support. You can watch editions of the Fast Forward Newsline in this little box each week at this time. My name is David Kattenberg. Thanks again. Join us again next week. Bye-bye.